The first thing Luann Brisby ever learned about men like Aldrich Vane was that they didn't look at women like her. Not really. They looked past her, through her. The way you look through a window when what you actually want is the view outside. Luann had been cleaning rooms at the Castor Grand Hotel for 6 years, and in those 6 years she had become, to the people who mattered in that building, something close to furniture. A rolling cart, a face behind a cart, 270 pounds of quiet efficiency that moved through corridors before sunrise and disappeared before the guests wanted their eggs. She didn't mind it, mostly. Or, she told herself, she didn't. She had learned early, from her mother, who cleaned office buildings on the night shift, and from her grandmother, who had cleaned those same buildings before her mother, that invisibility was not the same as worthlessness. You keep your head down, her grandmother used to say, and you see everything they're trying to hide. Luann had taken that as practical wisdom. She had no idea, at 26, that it was also prophecy. The Castor Grand occupied the top 8 floors of a glass tower in downtown New Orleans. Below it was a law firm, a private members club, and a restaurant that required reservations 4 months in advance. The hotel itself catered to a specific kind of guest, the kind who paid in cash, or through 3 layers of corporate entity, who arrived without luggage tags, who tipped in hundreds and asked for nothing except that their floor be kept very, very quiet. Luann had a system. Room 1401 first, always, because the guest in 1401 left at 5:40 every morning without fail and wanted his towels folded into swans, which she hated doing but did anyway because he was consistent, and consistency was its own mercy. Then she worked counterclockwise around the 14th floor, down to the 13th, then the 12th. She finished before 7. She was back in the service elevator before the breakfast carts rolled out. Most mornings, she didn't see a single guest face to face. The morning she met Aldrich Vane, she was running 11 minutes behind because someone on the 13th floor had left an entire cheese board upended in the hallway, and she'd had to clean the carpet before the smell set. She was pushing her cart past room 1308 when the door opened. She didn't look up. That was the rule. Eyes on the cart, give them room to pass. Pretend the hallway belongs to them. But the man who stepped out didn't pass. He stopped. And then, which no one ever did, he spoke directly to her. "You're the one who reported the broken lock on 1312 last Tuesday. It wasn't a question." Luann looked up. He was tall. Not remarkable, but tall, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from control. Grey at his temples, a suit that cost more than her mother's car, eyes that were doing what she'd spent her whole life doing, cataloguing everything without appearing to. "Yes," she said. "Why?" She blinked. "Because it was broken. The guest in that room didn't report it." "The guest in that room," Luann said carefully, "was using the broken lock to prop the door open 6 inches every night. I figured he had his reasons. But a broken lock is a liability, so I reported it to maintenance. I didn't say anything about the door." The man looked at her for a long moment. Not the looking past, actually at her. It was unsettling in the way that all direct attention was unsettling when you weren't used to receiving it. "What's your name?" "Luann Brisby. Housekeeping." "I know what department you're in," he said. "I asked your name." He said it without cruelty. He said it the way you say something obvious matter-of-factly, and somehow that was stranger than if he'd been rude. He turned and walked toward the elevator without another word. Luann stood in the hallway with her cart for 3 seconds. Then she went back to work. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't need to. She'd been working the Castor Grand long enough to know that the guests on 13 and 14 who stayed longer than a week, who received visitors at odd hours, who tipped in cash and required no particular services except silence. Those guests were not people you Googled. You cleaned their rooms. You noted what they left out and what they kept locked away. You said nothing. You kept moving. But she was curious. She couldn't help that. His room was meticulous in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural. No personal items on the surfaces. Toiletries lined up with geometric precision. The bed barely slept in. He was a light mover, or he barely slept. On the desk, a single legal pad covered in handwriting she didn't try to read. A burner phone beside it. A glass of water, half empty, with a faint lipstick smudge on the rim that didn't match any color she'd ever seen him wearing. She noted these things the way she noted everything, filed them away, said nothing to anyone. His name, she learned eventually, from a name she overheard the concierge whisper to the assistant manager in a tone that made the assistant manager go slightly pale, was Aldrich Vane. She looked him up that night on her phone, lying in her apartment in Tremé, with the window fan going and a bowl of red beans going cold on the coffee table. The results were thin. A few mentions in financial trade publications from 5 years ago. A name attached to a holding company, then 2, then 6. A brief article about a real estate acquisition in Miami that had been contested, and then, abruptly, not. A photograph from a charity gala in which he stood with a New Orleans city councilman and a woman in a red dress who was identified as his associate. Nothing about what he actually did, which told Luann everything she needed to know about what he actually did. She put her phone down. She ate her cold red beans. She went to sleep. The next morning she was back on the 13th floor at 5:15. He was standing in the doorway of 1308 again. She genuinely wasn't sure if he'd slept. "You didn't ask," he said. "About what my name? After yesterday, I know your name," Luann said. "Aldrich Vane, you've been in 1308 for 9 days. You have a standing order for coffee at 6, but you're never there to receive it, so it's been sitting in the warmer, which means you either order it for habit or for someone else's benefit. You receive 2 visitors, sometimes together, usually separately. One of them is left-handed, and one of them smokes menthols, which I can tell from the burn pattern on the balcony railing, even though smoking isn't permitted. You read the physical newspaper, but you tear out specific pages before you leave for the day, which means there's something in the news you don't want me to see, which is interesting because I would never read your newspaper." She stopped. She hadn't meant to say all of that. It came out the way things sometimes did when she was tired and running behind and caught off guard by being directly addressed in one smooth, unstoppable stream. Aldrich Vane looked at her. "You notice a lot," he said. "It's my job to notice. Most people in your job notice nothing. Most people in my job are trying to get through the shift," Luann said. "I'm trying to do the job well. Those are different things." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come back at 7. I want to talk to you. I'm off the floor at 7. I'll clear it with your manager." She wanted to tell him she didn't like being managed around. She wanted to say that her schedule wasn't his to adjust, but she had 6 years of self-preservation instinct that knew better than to say any of those things to a man like Aldrich Vane. So she said, "Okay," and kept pushing her cart. At 7 o'clock she knocked on the door of 1308. He opened it himself. Inside there were 2 chairs positioned in the center of the room, facing each other at a slight angle, which meant he had moved the furniture before she arrived, which meant he had planned this more than casually. On the table between the chairs was a coffee service, 2 cups, and a plate of the beignets from the lobby bakery that she had once mentioned to her coworker. Darlene were her weakness, except she had said that in the service corridor on the 9th floor 3 weeks ago, and there was absolutely no logical reason for him to know that. She sat down. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her face neutral. "You've been at this hotel for 6 years, he said. "Yes. Before that you worked at the Magnolia Suites on Canal Street. Before that you were at a cleaning company in Gretna that went out of business." He had done his own research. She absorbed this without expression. "Is there something you want to ask me?" she said. "Or are we doing a full background presentation first?" Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, something that preceded a smile by about 100 miles. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly, not politely, honestly. Those are sometimes the same thing." "They're rarely the same thing," he said. "Here's the question. Last Thursday, room 1309, the guest checked out Thursday morning. You cleaned that room Thursday at noon. There was a briefcase under the bed." Luann said nothing. "It wasn't there when the guest checked in," Aldrich said. "It was there when he checked out. He didn't take it. You cleaned the room. What did you do with it?" The room was very quiet. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. "I tagged it and turned it in to Lost and Found," Luann said. "Standard procedure. I logged the time, the room number, a description of the item, black hardshell briefcase, combination lock, no identifying tags, and signed the log. You didn't open it. It had a combination lock. That's not what I asked." Luann met his eyes. "No, I didn't open it. It wasn't mine to open. Didn't you wonder what was in it?" "Of course I wondered. I also wonder what's in the sealed boxes people ship back from vacation, and whether the night manager is skimming from the minibar inventory, and what my neighbor is cooking every Sunday that smells like that. Wondering and doing are different things." He looked at her for a long time. She held the look. She had nothing to hide, and she knew from experience that people who did something wrong rarely held eye contact this long. They either looked away first, or they overcorrected and stared too hard. She just looked at him the way she looked at everything, steadily, without agenda. "The briefcase," he said finally, "belonged to someone who works for me. He left it there intentionally, as a test for the housekeeping staff. She processed this. A test of what? Of who could be trusted. The beignets were getting cold. She reached out and took one, because she wasn't going to let them go to waste over drama, and because reaching for the beignet was also a way of saying, I'm not rattled without having to say it. "And," she said, 3 other staff members cleaned rooms on that floor that week. The briefcase moved between 3 different rooms before it ended up in 1309. Of the 4 staff members who encountered it, in various configurations, you were the only one who logged it and turned it in without opening it or removing any contents. How do you know I didn't remove contents? Because I know what was in it. She ate the baguette. It was still warm. She thought about her mother, who had spent 30 years cleaning other people's things and never once took anything that wasn't hers, not even a forgotten $5 bill, because a reputation for honesty is the only thing a working woman gets to keep. She thought about her grandmother saying the same thing in different words. "Okay," she said. "So I passed your test. What does that mean for me?" "It means," Aldrich said, "that I have a proposition." He didn't say job offer. He said proposition, which was a different word carrying a different weight. "I'm listening," Luann said. What he proposed was not illegal. At least, not directly. He needed someone on the inside of the cast or grand. Not for anything dramatic, he said, but for the particular kind of quiet attention she had already been providing without being paid for it. He had business being conducted on 2 floors of this hotel, and he had reason to believe that someone with access to these floors, was reporting his movements to people who should not know his movements. He needed eyes, consistent, unremarkable, already present eyes. He was willing to pay significantly for those eyes. "And when you find out who it is?" Luann asked. "That becomes my problem. I don't want to be involved in anything that gets anyone hurt." He looked at her in the way she was starting to recognize, that flatly direct look that wasn't threatening but was very, very serious. "I'm not asking you to hurt anyone. I'm asking you to tell me what you see. The same thing you've been doing for free." She thought about it. She thought about her rent, which was going up in March. She thought about her mother's car, which needed a transmission. She thought about what it meant to be asked directly and seriously to do something she was already genuinely good at. "I want it in writing," she said. "Not a contract with names on it, but I want the terms clear before I agree to anything." He nodded once, like it was the answer he expected. They met twice more in the following week. Once in the service corridor off the 12th floor, once over the phone via a number he gave her on a card that she was instructed to use only from a payphone, which she was mildly annoyed about, because finding a working payphone in New Orleans required more effort than anyone acknowledged. She reported what she observed. He listened. He asked precise follow-up questions. He never told her what he did with the information. On the 11th day, she saw the thing that changed everything. She was restocking the service closet on 13, which required her to be at the end of the hallway at an angle that let her see, without meaning to, without position herself to, the door to 1307. The door to 1307 was opening. The man coming out was Preston Hale. She knew him because he was the assistant manager on duty 3 mornings a week, and because he had twice corrected her log entries for unnecessary detail which had irritated her considerably. He was buttoning his jacket as he stepped out. He did not see her. He moved toward the elevator with the particular hurried casualness of someone trying very hard not to look guilty. Room 1307 was registered to a man she had never seen but whose room she had cleaned. A quiet room, almost too quiet, the kind that gave no information at all, which itself was information. The guest's name on the registration was a name she now knew, from context, was one of the aliases Aldrich's people tracked. She sent the text from the payphone on Frenchman Street at 6:45 in the morning, standing in the September heat with her cart still in the service elevator, because she had decided that some things did not wait. Aldrich responded in 12 minutes. What happened after that she was not present for and did not want to be. She knew that Preston Hale did not show up for his shift the following Wednesday. She knew that the guest in 1307 checked out that same afternoon, very suddenly, leaving behind a room that had been methodically cleaned of all prints and traces in a way that told her whoever he was, he'd done this before. She knew that Aldrich appeared in the hallway of the 14th floor that Thursday morning as she was finishing her route. She did not slow down. He fell into step beside her cart. "I want to increase our arrangement," he said. "I want a better payphone," she said. That got the actual smile, not the preceding edge of it. It landed on his face with the particular quality of something that didn't happen often and was therefore more notable when it did. He was 41 years old and he had not gotten there by trusting people easily, and she understood instinctively that the smile was not nothing. "You can use a burner phone," he said. "I'll get you one." "Thank you." What does increase mean specifically? They had arrived at the end of the hall. She stopped the cart. He stood beside it and looked out the window at the city below, and for a moment he looked like any man looking at any city, thinking about any ordinary thing. But he wasn't any man. She had spent 6 weeks learning that. "It means," he said, "I want you positioned on a different floor, 16. There's an event suite. There are going to be some dinners over the next 3 weeks. I don't do event service. I know. I'm going to request you specifically as a housekeeping liaison for the suite. Your manager has already agreed." She filed away the fact that he had already done that before asking her, and she decided she would address it rather than swallow it. "You asked my manager before you asked me." He turned from the window. "Yes, I'd prefer you ask me first." A pause. "You're right. I should have." She hadn't expected that either. Most men who controlled the rooms they were in didn't respond to being corrected with simple agreement. She had prepared a longer argument. She set it down, internally, unused. "Okay," she said. "Tell me about the dinners." The event suite on 16 hosted 3 dinners in the following 3 weeks. They were not large, 8 to 12 men each time, different configurations, overlapping in some names and not others, the kind of gathering that from the outside looked like a private business dinner, and from the inside was something more deliberate. Luann moved through the edges of these events, with the same invisibility she had cultivated for 6 years, refilling water glasses and collecting empty bottles and noticing, because noticing was what she did. She noticed that the man who sat at Aldrich's right hand at the first 2 dinners, a compact, watchful man named only Severin, at least to her, did not attend the 3rd dinner. She noticed that at the 3rd dinner, Aldrich's posture changed, slightly, almost imperceptibly, but she had spent weeks studying the economy of how he moved, and something was off. She noticed that one of the new men at the 3rd dinner spent a significant amount of time with his phone under the table, and not in the casual way people checked messages, but in the pointed way people sent messages, and that he appeared to be doing it primarily during moments when Aldrich was speaking. She refilled the water glass nearest to this man, and she saw, in the 2-second window before he tilted the phone, that the thread was labeled with a name she recognized from the registration logs, the same alias as 1307. She set down the water pitcher. She went to the service corridor. She texted Aldrich's burner from her own. Man on your left, grey checked jacket. Check his phone. She went back into the suite. She poured water. She collected an empty bottle. She kept her face exactly as it always was, attentive to the room, invisible to the people in it. Aldrich read the message 7 minutes later. She knew because she watched, without watching, the slight change in his attention. The way his eyes moved to grey-checked jacket without landing on him directly. The way he shifted the conversation, smoothly, toward something that pulled everyone's focus to the other end of the table. What happened next was quiet and fast, and she missed most of it because she was professionally occupied with clearing the appetizer course. By the time she came back through the main door, grey-checked jacket was no longer at the table. 2 of Aldrich's men were no longer at the table. Aldrich himself was speaking calmly to the remaining guests about something she gathered was the cover topic. A real estate development on the North Shore. And the surface of the evening had been restored to something that looked unremarkable. She didn't see Aldrich alone again until after the suite had been fully cleared, and she was running the vacuum along the far wall, which she always did last. And he came back in through the private entrance and closed the door behind him. She turned off the vacuum. The man in the grey jacket, she said, is being dealt with, the name on his phone. It was the same as 1307. Yes. So he was connected to Preston Hale. Aldrich looked at her. Yes. She thought about that. The chain of it, the way it connected, the way something she had seen 6 weeks ago turned out to be the beginning of a longer thread. She was aware, standing in the emptied suite in her housekeeping uniform with the vacuum handle still in her hand, that she had done something significant. She wasn't entirely sure how to hold that. "Is it over?" she asked. "This part of it," he said. She nodded. She turned the vacuum back on. "Luann." She turned it off again. He had crossed the room. He was standing, not close exactly, but closer than the conversation required, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen him use before. Not the assessing look, not the direct professional look, something that had less of a name. "I've worked with a lot of people," he said. "People I've paid well, people I've known for years, people who owe me considerably. I have not worked with many who would text me a warning in the middle of a room full of my enemies and then go back to pouring water. I poured water," she said, "because that's what I was being paid to do at that moment. I know, that's exactly what I mean." She looked at him. He looked at her. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, same as it always did. "I'm not looking for a patron," she said, because she needed to say it. "I'm not looking to be rescued or elevated or taken in. I know what I am, and I'm fine with what I am. I did this work because you asked me honestly, you paid me fairly, and the work itself was something I was capable of doing. That's the whole of it. I know that too," he said. "I'm not offering to rescue you. I'm not interested in rescuing anyone." He paused. "What I'm offering is a permanent position, with a salary that reflects what you actually do instead of what your job title says you do, with full knowledge of the scope of what I am and what this work entails. She absorbed that. You're asking me to step out of the hotel? Yes, permanently. Yes. She thought about 6 years of the same floors, the same counterclockwise route, the same folded towels, and the same guests who didn't see her, and the same service elevator, and the same invisible competence. Day after day, efficiently and without credit, she thought about the briefcase under the bed in 1309. About the broken lock on 1312. About Preston Hale buttoning his jacket. About a phone screen and a name she recognized, and the weight of knowing when to say something and how. She thought about her grandmother, who had cleaned office buildings for 30 years, and told her that invisibility was not the same as worthlessness. It occurred to Luann, standing in the emptied suite at the Castor Grand, that her grandmother had been right, and also that invisibility, once you chose to step out of it, was not the same as losing what made it valuable. She had noticed everything because no one watched her. She had understood everything because no one explained anything to her. That was not a condition of her housekeeping position. That was her. She could take it anywhere. I have conditions, she said. I assumed you would. You ask me before you arrange things with my superiors. Any superiors, mine or yours, agreed. I need to understand what I'm being asked to do before I agree to do it, every time. Not after, agreed, and if I ever decide to walk away, you walk away, he said. With everything you've earned, without consequence a beat. You have my word. She considered the word of a man who ran criminal enterprises from hotel suites and spoke in the careful grammar of someone who had learned early that precision was protection. She considered it seriously. Okay, Luann Brisby said. She put the vacuum away. She gathered her cart. At the door to the service corridor, she paused. For what it's worth, she said, you should get someone better than Preston Hale as your inside contact if you're going to run operations out of a building long term. He was skimming the minibar inventory. I noticed that 8 months ago. Anyone paying attention would have. She left him standing in the middle of the empty suite with an expression that she suspected, from the glimpse she caught as the door swung closed, was something between surprised and deeply, genuinely pleased. She took the service elevator down. She handed in her cart and her passkey and her name tag. She walked out through the loading dock into the New Orleans morning, where the light was turning gold over the rooftops of the quarter, and the smell of chicory coffee drifted up from somewhere on the street below. And she put her hands in her pockets and she thought, okay, let's see what you're made of, Luann. And then she walked toward whatever came next.